Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels with me, Martin, Jill and Sean.
Hi.
Later on, I'm going to be talking to Jayne Hickling, known also as Allotment Cook. She's from Lincolnshire, so we're going to find out all about allotment and the community work she does. Also, that her grandparents worked on a royal estate. Grandfather was a gardener at Windsor and Granny worked in the royal kitchens.
Ooh,
yes.
Exciting stuff. All of that to come. But before we get started, we've got to say a thank you to Plant Grow for supporting the podcast. So Plant Grow are based in Norfolk, and they provide liquid feeds and mulches and all sorts of amazing gardening products, all made with organic material that's grown in Norfolk.
And we've also got to say a thank you to our listeners, because we've had loads of questions coming in. So we perhaps haven't been able to cover all of them this week, but we'll get onto them next week as well. But we have a top tip from one of our regular listeners, Pauline, who was watching one of our videos a couple of weeks ago where Martin was pruning down the autumn fruiting raspberries. And her top tip, because when we'd cut them down, we shredded the old raspberry canes, and you're going to put those in the compost heap. But Pauline said, I think it was her grandfather used to use the pruning, so the old canes, to use as a network for her peas, for his peas to grow.
Good
up.
idea.
So they'd be a bit prickly. So would that put the birds off?
It would be, yes, and just cut them and push them in the ground.
Yeah.
Good idea. Plant supports.
A bit twiggy as well. So that would...
good tip there,
Yeah.
Pauline. Thank you. What a shame I shredded them all.
Yeah.
Too late. They've all gone in the compost heap now.
Good tip. Exactly, yes. If you've got any more tips, anybody, send them in to us. Please do.
Share them. And if you've got a question for the team or Martin, info@potsandtrowels.com is our email address. But shall we go and meet Jayne?
So, Jayne, thank you very much for joining us today for a chat on the podcast. So, to start with, tell us how you got involved in horticulture. So, at the moment, you live and breathe gardening, horticulture, allotments. But how did this journey all start for you?
Oh gosh, it's always such a tricky one, this one, because there's so many different layers to this one. Obviously, the first one is, like a lot of people, started off with probably my grandparents, growing in their garden, and actually because I grow edibles, it's the idea of, well, which came first? Was it the food, or was it the growing of the produce in order to create the food? And actually, for me, they sort of went hand in hand, because my nan was a great cook. My mum was a great cook as well, as a result. And a lot of the stuff, just like sort of that generation, was very much, it was homemade. But my nan actually used to work in the royal kitchens. So she was cooking back in the 70s, stuff that wasn't being sort of cooked by many people. So I remember the smell of curries and, all these different, almost Commonwealth recipes being cooked. And then they had the garden as well. So I spent quite a lot of time with the grandparents and their huge garden, and just like many people, shelling peas and so on. So what I didn't really realise at the time is that my granddad, his family, were also royal gardeners. So, there's a massive link there. So we're looking at sort of the Royal Windsor estates. They lived in Virginia Wharton. Obviously, you got the massive and beautiful, beautiful area there. So that was their stomping ground. So there's a whole history where, obviously, I go back to my grandparents, but actually we can go back a few hundred years more in terms of what my growing journey is. So in terms of me growing, obviously my mum actually cooking a lot of produce as well. I sort of came to it when I first got my own little home on my own. Just like I had this cottage that I rented, had a beautiful old cottage garden, an old cooking apple tree at the end, a little stream. It was very idyllic, and I started growing then. So that was back in 98 that I sort of started doing it for myself, if you like. Then you sort of had, marriage, family, children. And I was growing with the children when they were little in our little back garden. When we moved to Lincolnshire, the aim was, we're going to move somewhere with a nice big garden so that I can grow everything I want to. Problem is, we were moving during one of the financial crashes, which meant we couldn't actually move into a nice old house. We had to almost do a part exchange for the new build, which means our back garden is like a postage stamp.
Right, okay.
So you can grow a bit in there, but a great deal. So I got myself an allotment, which I thought was a really sort of strong and brave thing to do because allotments, back in just over 10 years ago, had always been in my mind for the old boys. It was a
Mm.
very sort of male dominated area. And there's me, I'm a woman and I'm going to go and do allotmenting. And actually, what we certainly have had over the last 10 years is more and more women, more and more families actually getting into growing, and that's just absolutely amazing. And obviously the cooking in with that as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Which
question,
is
that one.
where Allotment Cooks, which is what you're known as on your socials, isn't it? The Allotment Cooks. And I think it's true what you said about the allotments. They were very sort of, that stereotype, men down there years ago. But I think they have changed, haven't they now? And, there's lots of ladies on there with plots, husbands and wives, and lots of plots have been subdivided into smaller plots to get people
Yeah,
more involved, I think. So I think it is very much more inclusive and welcoming nowadays.
definitely. And I do remember a particular chap of a certain age, when I first got my, no, it wasn't even first, I think I'd been growing for about 3 or 4 years on the allotment by then. And he came over and talked to me and said, yes, because the ladies like the flowers. And I just like looked at it and said, no, I'm a fruit and veg girl.
You've got
And
to be
I
able
have
to eat
flowers.
it.
But I
Yeah.
have flowers so that I get the pollinators, so that I'm going to get my fruits. That's
Yes,
it.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
I I am getting more flowers. I'm definitely getting more into the non-edibles. But yeah, no, that is my passion, is the edibles, because then what can you do with it next?
exactly. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the allotment a bit more in part two, and I want to find out what you're planning to grow this year because I know you grow a wide range of different fruit and veg in there from watching your social media posts. But you're also involved because, well, I suppose we ought to say you are trained as a school teacher, aren't you? That's what you
Yes.
are as a
Yeah.
as a professional school teacher. But you
Yeah.
do an awful lot in horticulture for the community. Am I
Yeah.
right in thinking as well you're quite heavily involved with an In Bloom group?
Yes, I am. So, East Midlands in Bloom, which is a part, obviously, of the wider
Hmm.
Britain in Bloom. So it's sort of subdivided across the country. And then we've got Horncastle, which is where I landed in Lincolnshire. And that's over 18 years ago. We've actually got the Horncastle in Bloom, and I'm the chairperson for Horncastle in Bloom. So it is sort of, getting the community involved in growing, making growing spaces out of sort of almost neglected areas and just bringing that whole beauty of horticulture. And obviously, Horncastle has such a rich
Mm.
botanical history with Sir Joseph Banks. And it's just like, it's madness that why we need to get all of this out there. And we do have the Joseph Banks Centre, and they have the most amazing herbarium. If you've never been there, you must have been there.
I haven't
Have
been. No, I
you
haven't. No,
not?
I've heard, I know of it, but it's on our list to do. In fact, we'll try and do it
Yes.
this spring before it gets busy, because I've been told all about it.
Yeah, I need to hook you up because it is amazing. And actually, the guy who runs it, Paul, he is so passionate about it as well. And obviously, a lot of what they do, they have to record it in a certain way, and obviously going off to cue. And,
Hmm.
it's just amazing. Just in our little Lincolnshire town, we've got all these amazing horticultural botanical links. And why not bring it to life? And
Yeah.
obviously, that all includes encouraging the younger growers coming up as well.
Absolutely, and I think the In Bloom groups are really good. I mean, I used to be involved with Yorkshire In Bloom, and many many years ago did some judging for East Midlands In Bloom. But it's not just about flowers and hanging baskets in the towns and villages now. It brings in a whole area, doesn't it? It's about community and biodiversity and sustainability and the whole package. So I think it's great to get people involved.
Yeah, and that's one thing when I first took it on, is this is not going to be just about hanging baskets.
Mm.
Obviously, that is a big part of it, but it's not the only thing. So I do actually have an allotment community garden, which I sort of given this piece of land, which had never been used before. It's a bit ropey. And I've basically designed and set out the whole growing space to make sure that it was accessible for the community. So bearing in mind, obviously, disability gardeners, making sure it had wide enough paths.
Mm.
Some of the beds, which can be raised beds, not too wide, so that anybody who is a wheelchair user doesn't have to reach over too far. All these kinds of things, as well as sort of the younger groups and children. And actually, we've got this idea of mental health and well-being and getting out and growing and using growing spaces. But then what do we do with all this produce we're growing? Well, we've also got a cost of living crisis, so the food
Yeah.
goes to food hubs and food larders. So, we're sort of hitting all of these positives, which, that is horticulture, is positive.
It is, absolutely, absolutely. Right, what we'll do, we'll take a little break now. We'll come back to you shortly, and then we're going to find out all about your allotment and what you're growing.
Later on, we'll hear about the highs and lows of having an allotment, because it's not all easy sailing, is it? Really?
No,
Sailing's key there,
flooding
isn't
and
it?
all
But,
sorts
Yeah.
of things.
But I'm very excited. I wish I'd been there when you were chatting to Jayne, because you brushed over it quite lightly. So not only was she influenced in the garden by her grandparents, another one of our guests, being influenced by grandparents, but her grandmother worked in the royal kitchens. And
yes.
you didn't ask her anything.
And
She was
royal
cooking,
gardeners
and
as well.
Oh, I know, yes. But she was
But
cooking
Jayne explained
curries
it clearly.
Yeah. I wanted to know what exactly she did in the royal kitchen.
Well,
you know,
She's going to
was
have
she
to come
head
back
chef
on and tell
or-
us all about that.
I
We'll have
think
to have
so.
a
We
bat
need-
in a few.
That'd
Yeah.
be part 2, Jane.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go and see her on the allotment in
Okay.
Horncastle, which
So I
isn't
can
that
ask
far
her.
from where we live. What we ought to just point out as well, just an observation. I recorded that with Jane a couple of weeks ago, and my face has changed considerably since then. In case you were
Yes.
wondering what it was like then, I was having skin treatment, and it's now getting better.
Yes, so if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, then
Yes.
you'll notice the difference. So it's worked.
It's
doing
worked,
really
working,
well.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
We
So
could do
it was
kind of a
Royal
time of
Windsor,
motions.
wasn't it?
Yes, Windsor Castle. And I mean, they still have amazing gardens there, but I think going back in time when they had all the walled gardens, it was much more productive. I remember reading Percy Thrower's autobiography, which I lent to somebody many years ago. So if somebody out
We've
there's
had this
listening-
before, Martin. They're not going to hand it back. You've lost that, right? Let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
I need to buy one on eBay.
Let it go,
Let
Martin,
it go.
let it go.
But then, back in the sort of earlier in the 20th century, it sounds amazing. So yes, I mean to have a grandfather that's a royal gardener and a granny that's a royal cook.
Yeah.
And having
We
those
need to dig into
Commonwealth
that.
influences, because presumably they would have travelled, or certainly the cook might have travelled with the family and gone to some of the places and
Yes.
brought back some of these recipes. Maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know how it works. I don't know.
It's
Maybe
a
we
whole
need to
nother
know.
podcast. Yes, yeah.
Well, yeah, we will find out when we go, definitely.
Yes.
But yes, no, interesting stuff. And very busy lady is Jane, very, very busy.
She is,
I don't know how
yeah.
she squeezes it all in.
Well, we'll hear a bit more about that in the second part of the interview, won't we? But I just want to pick up. So we need to do a visit, don't we? Because Jane was talking. She lives in Horncastle,
Yes.
which is in Lincolnshire. But there's a place called the Sir Joseph Banks Centre. Obviously, Sir Joseph Banks was the big plant hunter, wasn't he, in his day? So when that would have been.
It's in the 1700s,
Yeah.
1700s into the 1800s. He went out when they discovered Australia,
Yeah.
and that's why lots of plants have got the name Banksii or something, or Banks in the name.
Okay.
So yes, and his family home, I think it was Revesby, wasn't it, in Lincolnshire, not far from Horncastle.
Ah, okay.
So yes,
So,
So
he,
there's
he
this
must have
centre and
collected a
it's-
lot of herbs then, because he's got that. There's the herbarium.
good. No,
That is what you'd think by the
Yes.
name, and that's what I used to think, to be fair, until I
I'm
went
sorry,
to Wisley.
I've got to say I'm laughing because for those watching on YouTube will have seen my face cracking up there. We discussed this before. I assumed a herbarium is where you keep herbs, and
Yeah.
now I've been told that it's not. So we did decide that we have to cover this and explain it.
Yes.
So what is a
well,
herbarium?
a herbarium isn't where you keep herbs. Herb in the tense of it, it's a plant material. So,
Herbaceous.
yeah, exactly. So, herbarium is where plants are preserved, usually dried. We haven't been to this one at Horncastle. We need to put it
Yeah.
on the list to go
Yeah.
as soon as we can. But Wisley, RHS Wisley down in Surrey, the RHS garden, they have a huge state-of-the-art herbarium, and if we can get access to that one day to have a chat there, that would be great. But essentially, and they're still doing it, I mean, they send people out looking for plants, cultivated plants, they bring specimens back, they dry them in these air-conditioned rooms with exactly the right temperatures
very
and
scientific,
humidity,
isn't it? It's like
and
a
they preserve them
laboratory.
as a dried plant or leaves or flowers, and then they're filed away, and they can use them then years later for identification purposes. It's a record of what the plant is. They can take DNA off it, and at Wisley they've got plants that they've preserved 100 years ago, so they've got this huge collection. So it is almost like a museum of dried plants, just to preserve them.
So why would there be one? Are there lots of herbariums over the country? I always assumed that Wisley was the the only one, the big one, because it was the RHS.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't that many, but I mean, botanic gardens would usually have a collection, I would have thought. But yeah, there's not that many, so it'd be interesting to see. I'm assuming the one in Horncastle is because of the links with Joseph Banks, and whether it's a collection of the plants that he introduced, I don't know. We will find out and report back on a future podcast.
Of a zoo.
Yes, but they're not living. They're all dead. It's a bit like the Natural History Museum of plants.
And if you walk in the main hall, you'll see this huge oak tree. From
So
we should probably get into some questions. So
we should.
Just before we do, if you've got a question for Martin or the team, just drop us an email, info@pots&trowels.com. Do you want? I think Jill's got some questions. I've got some questions. Shall I start with this one from Edwina in Derbyshire? Okay, Edwina says, it might be too late for this, I guess, but if there's another time, my questions are... Oh, I think she meant too late to feature on that particular week's podcast.
Okay.
Is there an effective way to get rid of vine weevils? Now, she's got quite a few other questions as well, which we might save for another episode. But yeah, vine weevils, how do you deal with those then, Martin?
Oh, dear.
Okay, yes. Well, for those that don't know, vine weevils are little grubs. The vine weevil is a beetle itself. It's about half an inch long, a centimetre or so long, that eats little notches on the leaves. So it doesn't do an awful lot of damage, but it's the grubs that hatch from the eggs, which are laid in the soil, and they're the ones that do the damage because they eat roots, and they love plants that we grow in the garden like primulas and begonias, pot plants they'll get into, violas, streptocarpus. We get them on heucheras in pots. More of a problem in container plants, to be fair, because the roots are restricted so that those little grubs can only feed on what's there. They can't move about. And often at this time of the year, in fact, if you're knocking a plant out of a pot, you might find these little white grubs. I'll get a photograph for Sean to drop on so you can see it if you're watching on YouTube. So you can handpick them. So if you knock a plant out and you see them, sometimes the plant looks a bit poorly, and that's a telltale sign. You can pick them out, squash them, or chuck them out for the birds to eat. Nematodes is a way that you can control them, which are these little beneficial microscopic worms that you water on. Not this time of the year. You need to do it in the growing season when it's warm. So the eggs are laid late summer, and then they feed through the winter, the grubs do. So you would do it late summer, early autumn, so the nematodes are in there to get the little grubs. There's also, it depends if you do use chemicals or not, but there is a vine weevil killer that you can buy from a garden centre. You mix it up as an insecticide, drench that into the compost, and that then will kill the grubs. So there are various ways, really. And an old trick that we used to use when I was a young gardener, plants in pots, we would put a layer of sharp grit on the surface, because the adult vine weevil beetle, she basically crawls along the surface of the soil or the compost and then pushes her back end down into the soil or compost and lays the eggs. But if it's all sharp and gritty, that's a bit uncomfortable, and she'll go,
Oh, I can imagine.
and go somewhere else to do it.
Okay. I would do the same thing, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be like sitting on a holly bush.
Yeah. Oh, no, not good. Right.
Move on.
Alison has emailed us at info@potsandtrowels.com. So first of all, says thanks for the brilliant podcast. So thanks for that comment,
Okay,
Alison.
where do we send the tenner to?
Yeah, no, if you wanted to do a review for us, Alison, as well on the podcast provider, then that would be brilliant. But Alison has an Acer, and she sent a couple of pictures through. She's noticed that there's quite a bit of damage on the tips of the Acer, so she thinks it's windburn. They do live in Derbyshire, on quite a high point in Derbyshire, and they do get quite strong breezes. So what she wants to know is, will it be okay, and should she prune it down to the green growth on the stalks as it warms up a little bit, so mid-March or even later?
Yes, I think you've answered your question there, Alison. Yes, I can see clearly on the photograph you've got the living wood, and then you can see these sort of silvery grey tips to the young stems, which they've died back, and it can be caused by all sorts of things. It's not necessarily a disease or anything like that. It can be weather, too hot, too wet in the winter. So it's a common thing on acers. So what I would do is exactly as you said. I would just get a sharp pair of secateurs, tip it back to where you can see a nice healthy bud back into the living wood, and do it mid-March, because then things are warming up and it's starting to grow. So just go over, do a bit of deadheading, and that will make it look so much better, and then you'll get side shoots growing out from where you prune back.
Okay, good.
Super,
So that's
super.
a job for Alison to do. And then we have a question from Little Miss Muffet, who
did she sit on a
sent
buffet?
this. She might have done. Hopefully, I haven't got any sharp sand on it, prickle her bottom. But she sent this on YouTube, and she says, "I see you have ivy growing up your tree." So I don't know. We've got a few trees with a bit of ivy on, haven't we? But she's asking if it damages the tree. I have a variegated type growing through from a neighbour and climbing up my sambucus. I was wondering if I should cut it off at the bottom so it doesn't completely engulf it.
Right, okay. Yes, people often worry about ivy growing up tree. And where we're sitting, I'm looking straight out of our dining room window at one of the trees, and we've got some old conifers, mature conifers in the tree that have got a clear stem to about 2 metres, 6 feet or so. And then it's variegated ivy that's gone up, and it actually looks quite attractive. Ivy is fine until it gets out of control. That's the problem. If you see it sometimes in trees where it's grown up the trunk and then you've just got this massive head of ivy, and what can happen is it's not a parasite, so it isn't going to kill it that way, but it's sometimes the physical weight of the ivy can damage branches, or it smothers the growth and the other growth can't get through. So in our situation, it's fine because it's going up the trunk, but it then can't get any further because of the dense conifer. So as long as you manage it, there's not a problem with it. And I think it's good because it's good, if you've got a bit of ivy up it, it's good for attracting wildlife and places for insects to hibernate, lacewings and ladybugs and that type of thing. But just don't let it get too out of control. So you might need to do a little bit of snipping and bits and bobs. Sambucus, the variegated or the dark-leafed elderberry, beautiful garden shrub. That one is probably slightly different because you often prune that to encourage new growth. So you don't want too much ivy. So I'd be tempted on that situation to probably actually not let it grow up your sambucus. Let it grow up a tree with a proper trunk.
Sambucus usually quite, well, I don't know, maybe they get a lot thicker when they're older, but they're not a huge tree, are they? It's a thin stemmed, isn't it? Mostly?
Yeah, that's right. Sambucus. I think it would smother it if you let it go up your sambucus.
Yeah. I mean, I just had a quick look at where the comment came from, and it was on the hellebores video that we did a week or two ago. 3 weeks ago, maybe. And so I don't know where in the garden that is, but that would perhaps give you an idea.
Front garden. That's
We're both pointing that way. That's on the
that one is the sort of silver leaf weeping pear.
Yes.
Pyrus.
Salicifolia pendula.
Yeah.
And you didn't know there was going to
Salicifolia
test
pendula.
questions. We'll be doing the rest of your plant ID test later.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Just a quick reminder that if you've got a question for Martin or the team, it's info@potsandtrowels.com. But I think we should probably go and hear a bit more about allotments, the highs and lows of allotmenteering.
So, Jayne, your allotment, I presume, is a separate allotment to the community allotments that you're involved with. So tell us about your allotment. What is on Jayne's allotment? Because we see a lot of it on social media. And is it a full-size allotment, or have you got more than one? Because there seems to be an awful lot there.
There is a lot. I've come up with this idea of once you plot, you can't stop. So I started off with basically what would be fundamentally sort of the equivalent of a half plot, which is about 6.5 meters by 16. So I started off with that. And then I sort of took on another half plot, then another half plot and another. So I've got sort of fundamentally 4 half plots or 2 large plots.
That's a big space to grow in, isn't it?
It is a big space, yeah. But obviously what we need to be thinking about is, because I do it on my own, so my allotment is my space. And my husband is so good because he knows that actually it's really good for my mental health as well. He can tell when I haven't had a bit of outside air time, because I get a bit grouchy. So he's quite happy for me to go off and do this. And, and I'm happy to do it as well because it's glorious. So my original plots, I sort of had, the normal basics. I did a little trial of doing the dig for victory plan with your rods and so on. However, my original plot had a bit of a flooding incident, and I think that was back in 2017, 2018. And I realised that the water table, because in Horncastle we've got 2 rivers, Water table is really, really high. And my first plot was quite susceptible to that. So I had all my fruit bushes in there, which I just literally espaliered just before it flooded. I had all my dahlias in there as well, obviously for the pollinators.
Hmm.
And I literally had to, and I was sinking to my knees trying to get these dahlia tubers out to save them, which I did manage to do. I did do a Margot as well. I fell backwards.
Oh,
Um,
right. Yes, that
I know,
famous
'cause
moment.
yeah, stuck in the mud. And actually, my daughter was with me at the time, and she just said, "Mum, your phone's in your pocket." So obviously, I quickly got up because it was in the back pocket. It was fine. So yeah, so I had to move all those, and then I had to work on raising the levels in that area because of the water table, and that's
Mm,
now where my polytunnel is.
right.
So the polytunnel, obviously, you're going to have all your I basically got the polytunnel for sweet potatoes. That's why I
Right.
got it.
Yeah.
Um, because they love humidity, and I did actually try sweet potatoes outside, and they vined away. They did the carrot job basically. They look brilliant on the surface,
Hmm.
and I pulled them up, and I basically had one little tuber
Right.
like
Yeah.
that. So when I got the polytunnel, grew them in there, much, much better because obviously it's the right environment for
Yeah.
them. So obviously parsnips, garlic. I've again done some raised beds in that area, and I know that a lot of people sort of say, "Well, why are you doing raised beds?" Well, sometimes you need it if you
Yeah.
particularly have flooding issues,
And is the
or
soil
actually,
clay as well that you've got?
no, actually, we've got really free draining sort of sandy
Right.
soils,
Yeah.
which is interesting because obviously the water table just comes right up through
Mm.
it. So yeah, although obviously I work on school projects as well, and the school project over in Boston where it is clay, that was particularly terrible because I had sort of 12, 13-year-olds trying to dig clay, and the under said, no, we're going to do no dig on this one because they're losing the will.
Yeah.
So fruit bushes as well, and obviously you've got a big space. Fruit bushes are really good because not only are they productive, but they do take up a lot of space, and they're quite easy to maintain. You just need to make sure that keeping your area clear, giving them a prune once a year, twice if you want to, once a year for me, um, and then harvesting. So they're
Yeah.
really easy to deal with. Obviously tomatoes. I've got a lot of fruit bushes actually. So I've got the black currants, the white currants, the red currants, berries, blueberries. What else have I got? No, 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 no. Green gooseberries, red gooseberries, thornless blackberries. Yeah, basically,
So a lot of fruit and veg. So, here we are now. It's still very early in the season. It's
yeah.
around about mid February. So are you doing much in the way of sowing yet, or is it still preparation and you'll be getting ready for the big push of the sowing later on? Because I know you do
So,
like to start things off a little bit earlier under cover, don't you?
generally, but I've been really good this year, and I have held off because I'm just like, no, you hold, particularly because over the last, and we talk about climate change and so on. Over the last 5 years, it has just been a complete roller coaster.
Mm,
Um, Prior to that, you could almost, just go on a right. So now this will go out then, and that's that.
yeah.
But last year, for example, we had such a short growing season because the frost just ran on, and then they
Mhm.
came back earlier as well. So our growing season was really short. So whereas, normally there's no such thing as normal, is there? Normally I might be sowing things, say, beginning of March or mid-March. This year I'm definitely holding it back. I don't think famous last words we're going to have the late frosts as badly as we did last year, but we just don't know. So we've just got to be really mindful of what the weather's doing as to when we're sowing.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I rarely sow much actually into our veg plots until the very end of March, or it tends to be early April, I think, because I think the soil's warmer then. And I'm a great believer that if you sow late, because some people say, "Oh, I'm too late, I haven't sown my carrots or my beetroot," but if you sow them in June, they catch up anyway, and they
Oh
do
yeah,
really well, don't they? So I'm never one for sowing early, and I know lots of people get itchy fingers and want to get sowing, but I
yeah,
should be doing some sowing in the greenhouse and bits and bobs like that, but not outside. So
not
do,
outside.
do you sit down at the beginning of the season or the end of a season, plot and plan what you're going to grow? Because I know you save some of your own seed as well, don't you?
I do, yeah. So the thing is, I plan what I'm going to do. I plan where it's going to go, and then I was like, "Oh, that's nice. I've not tried that before." And that's where am I going to put? And the whole plan goes out of the window. So I think it's yeah, planning is great,
I'm the
but you've
same.
got to. You've just got to adapt to what's going on around you because, sometimes it's just like, well, actually that has flooded this year. I cannot put stuff there. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to put it somewhere else. Right, where's it gonna go? So you have to be, ready to change, make
Yeah,
change.
and there's always something you want to squeeze in as well, isn't there? Things that just come along. So excellent. Oh
Yeah.
well, we need to come down and see the allotment in the summer when it's full of,
Yes.
fruit and veg and flowers, and bring the camera down and have a look at it. I mean, what do you do with all the food? You can't eat all of that. Does some of that go to the community side as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So the community plot is basically three different plots put together.
Mm.
So obviously we grow a certain amount there, but can't grow everything. And there are flowers there because it is in bloom as well. So yeah, quite a lot of what I grow, we might not have been able to fit onto the community plot. And I know that sounds mad, we might not have been able to fit, but we are growing a lot of produce
Yeah.
for a lot of
Mm.
people. So, anything that I have surplus, and I've actually encouraged other plot holders to do this as well, and I have a donation table. Anything which is surplus, put it on there and I'll get it to the food hubs. And last summer, one of the groups that we were helping out, they were literally feeding 600 people a week during the summer holidays from the produce that we were
That
providing
is
to them.
amazing, and it's all healthy, locally grown produce as well, isn't it? Not
And
processed. So that is
organic.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah, well
absolutely.
done. That's a great achievement. That is. I'm amazed that you fit it all in because you are a school teacher still. So I would imagine when the days you're not teaching, you are either on the allotment or planning things for Horncastle in Bloom or all the other little projects and things that you're with. So I don't suppose you ever get any time to do anything other than garden, do you?
No, that's it. Which is good because actually, when you're passionate about something, it's all positive again. If I
Mm,
didn't enjoy it, then that would be horrendous. Well, I
yes,
wouldn't do
exactly.
it, would I?
Yeah. No.
But yeah, it's quite difficult when people say, "Oh, can I just like do such and such?" Like, well, you're gonna have to book me in.
Mm.
Um, my husband has to book me in as well.
Oh, right. To plan a visit. Exactly.
It's like,
So
can
where
we go?
can
Can we go for a coffee? Have
yes.
you got a diary?
Exactly. Well, I know it's taken us a while to tie you down to a date for this, so I'm really pleased that
Yeah.
we've managed to speak to you, and we'll need to get booked in early for the summer to come and see
Yeah,
you in Horncastle at the allotment, if that's okay with you. How
definitely.
can people watch and follow what you're doing, Jayne?
I'm just about everywhere. My dad actually says this, you're everywhere, you are. I say, I know I am. So I'm on Instagram as Allotment Cooks. I'm on oh gosh, what's it called? Blue Sky, Blue Sky.
Hmm.
Rather than X, I've come off X now, but on Blue Sky as The Allotment Cook. Then I have YouTube as well, which is The Allotment Cook. And then I have my original Facebook members page, which is where it all started, really. And that is Allotment Cooks, and it is a members page because we've got files in there on different recipes and ideas, as well as sort of the growing, the cooking, which I am going to go more into the cooking side this year whilst maintaining the growing,
Hmm.
which is going to be fun. I'm really
Yeah,
excited about that. And then I've got the public Allotment Cooks Facebook page as well. I think that's it.
that's
Yes.
quite a lot, isn't it? So people can find you, like you say, everywhere. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much for taking time to have a chat to us on the podcast today. It's a sunny day today. We've both got the sun shining through our windows, so I would imagine when we've finished this, you're going to be straight out and down the allotment or doing something anyway. So
Yeah, well, I've
yeah,
got a horse cart being delivered this
right,
morning.
as you do.
But
Yeah,
still with flowers, yeah. Quite normal every day.
yeah.
Like, does
Just
everybody
a
have
normal
it?
Wednesday afternoon, exactly. Yeah, brilliant, lovely. Thanks, Jayne, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks.
Coming up, we've got a question about how to deal with suckers on a cherry tree. But before we get into any of that stuff, once you plot, you can't stop. That's a bit
Can't
like,
stop.
yeah. I mean, so
I love that.
she was talking about the size of a half plot in meters. So just to convert it for our kind of American viewers, that's about 20 feet by 50 feet, we think. And that's a half plot. So you'd probably have what, 40 by 50 or 20 by 100? What would you have, Mark?
Yeah, yeah, and
It's big, isn't it?
You say for our American viewers and listeners, what about old people like me? I still work in feet and inches.
Yes, he
I was
does.
and
trying not
gallons,
to be
I don't do
ageist.
litres or meters. You know, I'm
Whereas I know
imperial.
that the Americans definitely use feet. I
Yes,
can't guarantee
yes.
that all. Yeah, yeah. But actually,
careful.
I spoke to an American a couple of weeks ago who was absolutely astounded that we used feet at all, or miles at all, or pints at all. And I had to try and go through how, okay, if it's a drink, it's in pints, but if it's orange juice, it's in litres or whatever, because we have this really weird mixed system, don't we? You know,
We
you
do,
don't.
which
We
seems
do.
very silly.
And I went to buy some timber not that long ago,
Yeah.
and the actual
Two
measurements
before.
of the square, it was 3 inches by 2.
Yeah.
And what do you want? You know, a 2.4 metre length.
Yes, yeah, well, exactly.
Was it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Lots of things come
Yeah.
across from the old system anyway, don't they? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't go out and
Yeah.
buy 568 millilitres of milk. We'll buy a pint of milk. It just happens to
Exactly.
have that marking on it.
It must be quite confusing. I mean, you've got younger children, so it must be quite confusing for them to sort of suddenly have, you know, they take working in metres and centimetres for granted, but then suddenly you've got these different measurements. So, and
Well, I
they've
think-
never known that.
But it's just a bit like, I think they see it almost like an old custom. You know, it's like, but
Yeah.
we talk about that like they do in the
Yeah.
old days type
In the
thing.
old days.
But there was a chap I worked with a few years ago who used to just pick the relevant measurement depending on what he was a joiner, depending on what he was doing. So if he was measuring something that was to fit in an old window frame, then it was easier to do it in inches because it was
Yeah.
going to be more
Yeah.
exact.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Because it was probably
Yeah.
originally in inches. Anyway, we need to stop talking about
We do.
sort of stuff.
The old days.
When I was,
So,
but,
yes.
yeah, absolutely.
But she's got a lot of plots, and
There's-
She has.
she has got a lot of
Yeah,
plots, so that's good.
yeah.
And what I'm looking forward to doing, because we occasionally go Horncastle way, and if anybody is in that part of Lincolnshire and they see this lovely old cart, sort of that you would pull behind a horse, that's
Yeah.
going to be planted up with beautiful flowers and plants, then
Yes, that'll look
that's
lovely.
the In Bloom team there in Horncastle.
Yeah.
So well done,
Yeah.
Horncastle.
Well, and I guess In Bloom teams will be all getting started
Yes,
now
exactly.
for the sort of thinking about the spring and the summer, won't
Absolutely.
they? So it's good. Busy time for them.
Right.
We have got some more questions.
Questions?
Sean, you've got some as well, haven't you? But I've got another one from Edwina, who
Yeah.
we heard from earlier on, and quite a quick one. But she just says, "How do you stop suckers from a flowering cherry tree?"
Oh, right, okay. Not easily, I'm afraid,
Okay.
Edwina.
Sorry, Edwina.
Because they are prone to doing it, and they often start at a certain age, and it's sometimes if something damages the root, because they're quite shallow roots on cherry trees. They do go, some go deeper, but there's usually some quite near the surface. And if they get damaged by when you're digging in the garden or something like that, then that triggers it, but they will do it anyway. Sometimes they'll pop up through a lawn where there's a root just below the surface. So it's something that they do. There's no way you can stop it, but what I would say is, if rather than keep chopping them down, if they're coming from around the base of the trunk, rather than just keep chopping them down to a little stump, when they're young, try and pull them off, actually tear them off, even if it means exposing a little bit of the stem by pulling the soil away with a little trowel, and then actually tear it off, because if you tear it off, it removes the bud at the base, and that one won't regrow. Another one might grow next to it, but it saves you getting that little thicket. But there's nothing you can actually do to stop it. You've just got to control it.
That's quite hard to do that, Terry, because I know we've got one on the front, haven't we? And
Yeah.
I try and do that.
Yeah, you've got to get them when they're quite young, really. If they're old, then you struggle.
Yeah.
That's a similar,
Okay.
similar technique to when you were doing the apple tree on the apple tree pruning video, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so people
yeah.
want
Any
to see how
sucker,
to do
rose
that.
sucker, or anything, tear them off.
We'll put a link to the how to prune an apple tree, and then perhaps you can watch that and see how to do
Okay.
it. We have another question. Val in Woollerton, which is in Nottingham. What should I do when a small area of privet hedge has died? Should I dig it out and replace? Is that the only option?
Yes, if you're sure that it's dead, Val. I mean, sometimes privet is sort of semi-evergreen, and some years it loses its leaves in the winter, others not, and occasionally one plant will lose it and not. So make sure it's dead. Get your thumbnail and just scratch the bark on some of the stems, and if it's brown rather than green underneath, then it is dead. So yes, get rid of it before you plant more, because it could be a disease that's caused it, some sort of fungal disease in the soil. I would actually, where that plant has been removed, dig a barrel load or two of soil out, put that somewhere else in your garden, it would be fine, and then dig a bit of soil from another part of the garden, or you can dig it out of one and fill that hole in. Replenish the soil in the hole where you've dug the dead privet out, and mix in some garden compost, just to enrich it, really get that soil in good condition. Plant into it, water, feed it, get it established, and usually it will get away and be fine and catch up. And then when you've got it planted in that fresh soil sure that you've improved. Just make sure through the summer that you keep it watered in dry weather, and it should establish really well, and I think you'll be absolutely fine with it.
Good stuff. Actually, you just remind me there that obviously we just heard about starting community allotments on, I think, what was a bit of ropey soil. Not ropey soil, ropey land. That they've had to done that kind of improvement to that soil to get it growable, or?
Yeah, I mean, it is the secret to gardening, really. You've got to have good soil, whether you're growing fruit, flowers, vegetables, trees, privet hedges, whatever. The answer lies in the soil, as they used to say. So the more you can do to improve it, you need that mineral content, which is the actual soil, but you need the organic matter content, which holds on to moisture and nutrients and all those micro nutrients in the soil, and just keep the soil health there. So yeah, the more you can do to improve your soil, the better your plants will grow.
Okay. All right. Well, shortly we'll hear some jobs from Martin, what we should be doing in our gardens. But one more question. Wendy in West Bridgeford, no secret, that's my wife, but she wants to know what you do with a poinsettia. So this is probably a question she asked several weeks ago and I forgot to ask you. What can we do with a poinsettia? Is it something you could put out in the garden? Can you plant it out?
So are you thinking of planting this in your garden in Nottingham or in your garden at your apartment in Malibu?
Yes, well, this is the thing. I know they're from Mexico originally, aren't they, or South America?
They are. I mean, if you can't plant it in your garden at home. I'm sorry, I'm being facetious there. It's not hard. It will die. So if Wendy were to put this out in the garden now, it would shrivel away within a few weeks. So it won't stand any cold or any frosty weather on it. So it's an indoor plant, as you said. It comes from Mexico. I mean, you do see them if you go to places like south of Spain or the Canary Islands. They've planted them out and they grow into huge shrubs. No, you've either got to get rid of it or just keep it growing. And it, some people keep them from year to year. I'm sure now we've said this, we'll probably get comments in a week or two's time saying, I've had one for 5 years in the living room. So yes. Okay. Or you do invest in an apartment abroad, and we'll go and water it for you occasionally.
When our pots and trowels millions come in, that's what we'll be doing. Straight over there.
Good idea.
That's a little reminder to all you people listening and watching. Please share this with all your friends so that we can get this.
And watch the videos.
Yes.
And watch the videos. Absolutely. Well, look, we should probably have a think about what we should be doing in the garden this week, talking of going into our gardens, wherever we are in the world.
Exactly, yes. So this is going out on the 23rd, isn't it, of February? Is it the 23rd of February? Yes, it is.
Yes.
It's getting to the point where it's not spring yet, but it's feeling hopefully a little bit spring-like, and it's not too far away. So I'm going to be doing a bit of sowing in the greenhouse. It doesn't have to have any heat. So if you've got a bright windowsill or a cold frame or a cold greenhouse or a little polytunnel, there are things you can be sowing, especially the salads, all the lettuces and all the lovely salad leaves. They'll stand it quite cool. So sow them in trays or pots just to get some seedlings that you can either cut and eat straight away or prick them out and grow them on to plant out in the garden in about a month's time. And it's just nice to get that sort of green going. Spinach is another one you can add to it, and chard and all these lovely salad leaves. Spinach. Yeah, we do. We're going to grow a lot more. We've been eating a lot of spinach.
Yes, very good for you. Superfood.
Look at me, Popeye. The strawberry patch. We've been cleaning through the strawberry patch. We've got them in a raised bed. In fact, I think there is a video out on that at the moment, just out. So if you've got strawberries that are looking a bit tired and dishevelled in your garden, trim them back, get rid of all that old foliage, bit of weed round, bit of mulch round, just to encourage that flush of new growth, so you'll get beautiful strawberries later on this year. And then the other thing I'm going to do is the ornamental grasses. So the calamagrostis, we've got hacanacloas, we've got some miscanthus. These are what we call the deciduous grasses. So they die down in the winter, but they leave their structure, but it's all dead and sort of brown, and it's looked good through the winter, but now it's looking a bit tatty because the wind's blowing it around. So I'm just going to get my secateurs or shears, trim it down to the ground level. Don't leave it too long. If you wait another month, the grass will have started to regrow and you'll be chopping off the tops of the new grass. So do it before they start to grow from the base. And it just tidies them up, and then you'll get amazing display this coming summer.
But there are some grasses that you wouldn't cut down, aren't there? I know I've done that before by accident.
Yeah, anything that's evergreen, and it won't always kill them, but like things like the fescues or that type of thing. I'm just trying to think now. It's strange how
There's the
suddenly they go
bronzy-
out of your head.
The
names.
bronzy grass.
Yes.
Yes. Is that what you're thinking
yeah.
of? Yeah. I can't-
Carex, however you want to pronounce it. They are evergreen. So what you do with those is just sort of pull out any dead, just comb through them with your fingers. Put a pair of gloves on because sometimes they'll be a bit sharp.
Yeah.
Pull out the dead, but if you did cut one down, it would usually regenerate. But normally we just tidy them up.
So if a grass has got a bit, because often if they're a bit older, they get a bit of dead in the middle where they don't grow through anymore. It's all sort of like a circle on the outside.
It's like a donut almost.
Yeah. What do you do with that then?
Well, you can, as it grows, you will lose that hollow centre, but you could also dig it up at this time of the year,
Divide.
lift it all out the ground, get a spade and chop it into quarters, and then you've got 4. Better still 5. Odd numbers are better.
Okay,
So,
good
yeah.
stuff.
There you
Well,
go.
I think we've got a lot to get cracking on with. I think the gremlins are telling us it's probably time to call it a day because my YouTube,
I think it is.
my Zoom screen keeps freezing. So fantastic that we got those jobs. Really nice to hear about the allotmenteering. I think I've made that up. Is that real? No, allotmenting. Allotment is.
No, well, it's a good word. I like
let's
it.
go
Sean.
for it.
Yeah,
Should
add it
be.
to our dictionary. It is. And next week, if you're into orchids, watch or listen because we're talking to an orchid specialist and he's going to give us some tips on how to get started and how to look after
Brilliant
your
stuff.
orchids.
Right, we'll see you then.
See you then.
So we'll see you next
All right.
time.
Bye.
Bye.
Watch the videos on YouTube or Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Twitter or X, and subscribe to the podcast and never miss a thing. For more information, go to potsandtrowels.com.